My brother held up an empty blue Rolex box at our family dinner and told everyone I'd stolen Grandpa's watch. Then he said the part that mattered. "Mom, Dad, you can't put a thief in the will." The room went quiet. My mother set down her fork. My father wouldn't look at me. And Daniel just stood there, holding that empty box like it was evidence, like he'd already won. 40 years our parents had been together, and they were signing an updated will that weekend. Daniel knew that. He'd picked his moment. I felt my face go hot. 34 years old, and I was the kid getting accused at the table again. The scapegoat. The disappointment. The one who never made anything of herself. If you've ever been the family member who gets blamed first and believed last, the one they decide is guilty before you say a single word, stay with me. You're going to want to hear how this ends. I didn't defend myself that night. I didn't cry. I just looked at that empty blue box and went very, very still. Because Daniel made one mistake. He picked a watch to lie about. He didn't know I was the one who insured that watch. Let me back up, because who I am is the whole reason this story ends the way it does. My name is Maya. I'm 34 years old. And for a living, I investigate insurance fraud. That's the part my family always waved off. To them, it was a desk job. Boring. Something I settled for. You count other people's money for a living, Daniel liked to say, smiling, like it was a kindness to point it out. I'd just nod and let it go. What I never bothered to explain was what the job actually does to your eyes. I read claims all day. Hundreds of them. People telling me their version of events, and the paper telling me the truth underneath. After enough years, you stop hearing the story someone wants you to believe. You start seeing the seams. The dates that don't line up. The detail that's a little too convenient. A lie has a shape, and I'd been staring at that shape for over a decade. And the job teaches you one more thing. Fast. The most confident person in the room is usually the one with the most to hide. Calm is easy to fake. Paper isn't. Daniel is my older brother. He's 38. The golden child. The son who could do no wrong, even on the days he did plenty. Growing up, the math in our house was simple. If something broke, I broke it. I was 16 the night a lamp got knocked over during one of Daniel's parties. He told our parents I'd done it, sulking up in my room. I wasn't even home. They grounded me anyway, and Daniel stood in the hallway watching me take it, not saying a word. I remember the heat in my face more than the punishment. The unfairness of it sat in my chest for years. It never really stopped. 3 years ago, after my divorce, I moved into a small apartment and kept my head down. Daniel told the whole family I was falling apart, that I was jealous of his success. My mother repeated it back to me gently, like she was doing me a favor by warning me how I looked. I'd learned a long time before that. In this family, my side of the story always arrived too late to matter. By the time I spoke, the verdict was already in. So I stopped explaining myself. I got good at my job instead. Quiet work. Careful work. The kind nobody noticed. Here's the thing none of them remembered. Years earlier, when my parents needed help, I'm the one who set up their home insurance. Their whole policy. The coverage on the house, the contents, the valuables. I built that account with my own hands. And it still lived in my system, under my name, in the book of business I reviewed every single day. They'd forgotten that completely. Daniel never knew it in the first place. And Daniel always had money. Or he looked like he did. A new watch. A new car every couple of years. Dinners he insisted on paying for, loudly, so the table would notice. I used to wonder where it all came from. Later, I'd understand the answer was nowhere real. But that night, all I saw was my brother throwing cash around like a man who needed everyone to believe he was winning at something. That weekend was supposed to be a celebration. 40 years of marriage. My parents were throwing a big anniversary party at the house, 30-some guests, caterers, the good china, and right after the party, their lawyer, Mr. Okafor, was coming by to finalize the updated will. That detail sat quietly under everything else. Whoever was in good standing that weekend would be in the will. Whoever wasn't, wouldn't. 40 years of what my parents had built, decided in a single weekend. Daniel knew that timeline. I'd come to learn he knew it better than anyone in that house. The dinner before the accusation started off ordinary enough. The clink of forks, My father telling a story everyone had heard 100 times. Then, somewhere between courses, Daniel set down his glass and said he had bad news. He said Grandpa's Rolex was gone, missing from the locked drawer in our parents' bedroom, the watch our grandfather had worn every single day of his life. He used to let me wind it when I was small, the weight of it heavy in my little hands. It was the one thing in that house I'd ever truly wanted, and the one thing I would never, ever have taken. My father went pale. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. For a few long seconds, nobody said anything. Just the faint rattle of the caterer's cart somewhere down the hall, and my own pulse in my ears. And I watched my brother deliver that news with the strangest calm I'd ever seen on him. No panic, no urgency. He spoke slowly, carefully, like a man reading lines he'd already rehearsed in the mirror. I felt the room tilt before a single finger was pointed. I knew this family. I knew its math. And everyone at that table already knew whose name was coming next. For a moment, I actually believed they'd look for the watch, call a locksmith, check the drawer, search the house, anything but what I felt coming. Then Daniel turned to me. Maya was the last one upstairs, he said. Calm, almost sad about it, like it pained him to bring it up. She was in their bedroom before dinner. I saw her. I had been upstairs. I'd used the guest bathroom on the second floor, the way I had 100 times in this house. He knew that. He'd built his story on something true, which is the oldest trick there is. You don't invent a lie from nothing. You wrap it around a fact so people grab the fact and swallow the rest. I didn't touch the watch, I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. Nobody said you touched anything. Daniel spread his hands, reasonable, generous. I'm just telling them where you were. That's when I felt it start. The old reflex, the one trained into me since childhood. The heat climbing up my neck. The apology already forming in my mouth before I'd done a single thing wrong. My hands were not steady. I pressed them flat against my thighs, under the table, so no one would see them shake. For one ugly second, I almost said it. I'm sorry. The two words that had ended every argument in this family for 30 years. Always from me. Always to keep a peace that was never really mine. I didn't say them. I closed my mouth around them and held them there. I looked at my mother instead. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She kept folding and refolding her napkin, the linen whispering between her fingers. My father stared down at his plate like the answer to everything was written in the gravy. And I understood something cold and clear. In their heads, it was already settled. Daniel had spoken first, and in this family, first was all that ever counted. You've always been jealous of him. My mother said it softly, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. Just give it back, Maya. Before this gets any worse for you. Give it back. Like I was already holding it in my fist. Like all that was left was for me to confess and spare everyone the trouble of proof. The room was warm and bright and full of the smell of my mother's cooking, and I had never felt further from any of them. Then the stakes arranged themselves in my mind, sharp and simple. The party was in 2 days. Okafor was coming with the updated will the moment it ended. If I walked out of that weekend wearing the word thief, I wouldn't just lose their love. I'd lose my name in writing, in a signed, dated legal document, disowned officially, on paper, over something I had never done. And that was the moment the heat in my neck turned into something else, something slower, colder. The part of me that reads lies for a living woke all the way up, pulled out a chair, and sat down at the table. My breathing slowed without my deciding it. My shoulders dropped. The shaking in my hands stopped, not because I felt safe, but because I finally had something to do with them other than tremble. Because here's what I knew that they didn't. I know how people behave when something of theirs is actually stolen. They get the small details wrong because real shock scrambles the memory. What they do not do is announce the theft themselves, slowly, in full sentences, with a suspect already named and ready. My brother wasn't behaving like a man who'd been robbed. He was behaving like a man performing a scene he'd blocked out in advance. The calm, the sad eyes. The suspect served up before anyone even asked a question. So I stopped arguing. I stopped defending myself entirely. I just started watching him the way I watch a claim that smells wrong. And almost right away, Daniel handed me my first loose thread. He rested a hand on our father's shoulder, gentle, the dutiful son. "Don't worry about Grandpa's watch, Dad," he said. "I already handled the paperwork on it. It's all taken care of." The paperwork. Such a small phrase. Most people at that table let it float right past, swallowed up in the comfort of his voice. But I'd spent 12 years listening for the one word that doesn't belong in a sentence, and there it was, lodged in the middle of my brother's reassurance like a splinter under a fingernail. What paperwork does a missing watch need? You don't file paperwork on something stolen an hour ago. You report it. You tear the house apart looking. You don't soothe your grieving father by telling him it's already been taken care of. I went very still and ran it backward through my memory. And then it surfaced. A text. Weeks old. So minor I'd barely registered it when it came in. I'd asked Daniel once, half joking, whether the Rolex was even insured, since Grandpa never trusted banks with anything that mattered. His answer had been fast and dismissive. "Don't worry about Grandpa's watch. I'll handle the paperwork." Word for word, the exact line he'd just spoken out loud to our father. At the time, I'd assumed he meant estate things. The will. Something boring and brotherly that I didn't need to think about, so I hadn't. I'd left the message sitting in my phone, unread past the first line, the way you ignore a receipt you don't think you'll ever need. Sitting there now, with my family watching me like a stranger they'd caught in their home, I wasn't sure he'd meant anything boring at all. I said nothing about the text. I let my dinner go cold in front of me. I let them stare. I let them believe I was already beaten and bracing to confess. Let them. Every second they spent certain of my guilt was a second they weren't watching what I was about to do. Because the investigator in me had quietly opened a file. And the first line in it wasn't a defense or an apology or a plea for them to believe me. It was a single question I now needed answered more than I needed their forgiveness. What paperwork, Daniel? I didn't sleep that night. I drove back to my apartment, sat down on the floor with my laptop, and did the one thing my family had never once imagined I could do to them. I opened my work system, not to snoop, to check something that was legally, literally mine to check. My parents' home insurance policy lived in my book of business. I'd built it years ago. Their coverage, their valuables, schedule, every endorsement, every change ever made to it. If anyone had touched that policy, it left a trail. And the trail ran straight through an account with my name on it. I told myself I was only going to look once, just to prove to myself I was being paranoid, just to be sure I was wrong. I wasn't wrong. 2 weeks before the watch vanished, someone had added a valuables rider to my parents' policy. A single scheduled item, one vintage Rolex, appraised and listed, insured value, $48,000. I read it 3 times, my finger on the screen like the numbers might change if I blinked. The coverage on Grandpa's watch had been quietly raised to $48,000. 2 weeks before my brother stood up at dinner and announced it had been stolen. Here's the simplest way to say what that means. You do not increase the insurance on something right before you lose it by accident. That isn't bad luck. That's a plan with a date stamped on it. But it was the next line on the screen that made my stomach drop through the floor. The rider hadn't been requested by my parents. It had come in under an authorized contact on the account. And the name attached to that request was Daniel's. My brother had put $48,000 of fresh coverage on a watch he didn't own, 2 weeks before it disappeared. And he'd left his own name on the paperwork that did it. There it was. The paperwork. I sat very still on my apartment floor, the cold laptop light on my face at 2 a.m, and felt 2 things crash into each other. The first was vindication, sharp and almost sweet. The second was fear, real fear, because I finally understood that this had stopped being a family argument. I was staring at the front edge of something that had an actual legal name. And then the fear turned and pointed at me. I work in fraud. I know exactly how this looks from the outside. If I went anywhere near this account, if I touched it wrong, a defense lawyer someday could say I was the insider who manipulated it. My hands started shaking again, and this time it wasn't shame. It was my career flashing in front of me, my license, my livelihood. The one thing in my life that was entirely mine, suddenly tangled in my brother's lie. For a minute, I genuinely thought about closing the laptop and walking away, skipping the party, letting them think whatever they wanted to think, keeping my hands clean. The minute passed. Then I did what I actually do for a living. I stopped reacting like a sister and started working like an investigator. I wasn't going to touch the account again. I was going to document, from the outside, every move he'd already made. If I was going to be near this, I'd be near it the right way, the careful way, the way that protects you instead of burying you. And the next piece was already mine, because I'd built that too. 2 Christmases ago, I'd given my parents a video doorbell, a small, almost throwaway gift. I'd installed it myself, mounted it by the front door, set up the account on my own login, and then forgotten all about it. My parents never checked it. I'm not sure they fully understood it recorded anything at all. But it recorded. Every arrival, every departure at that front door. Time-stamped. Saved to a cloud account that was still, like so much else in that family, quietly sitting under my name. If my brother had carried that watch out of the house, there was a camera that may well have watched him do it. I didn't know yet what was on the footage. I just knew exactly where to look, and that nobody else even remembered it existed. It was a strange feeling, sitting there in the dark, realizing the kindest gifts I'd ever given this family were about to become the receipts they never knew I'd been collecting. I made a note and kept building. The confirmation I didn't expect came the next morning. I was running on no sleep and too much coffee when my mother called. Not to apologize. To press me again, softly, to do the right thing before it goes too far. And somewhere in the middle of defending how certain Daniel was, she let something slip. He's been worried about that watch for a while now, she said. He even asked me last month what it was actually worth. Said we ought to make sure it was properly protected. I kept my voice flat and even. He asked what it was worth? When, exactly? Last month sometime. Why does that matter, Maya? It mattered more than she could possibly understand. A month ago, he was asking what it was worth. 2 weeks ago, he insured it for $48,000. Then it vanished. The timeline was drawing itself now, one date at a time, and every single date pointed the same direction. I didn't explain a word of it to her. You don't show your work to a witness. I thanked her, told her I'd think about everything, and hung up. I should have felt triumphant. I had a paper trail forming and a brother who'd left his fingerprints all over the start of it, but the professional in me stayed cold and honest about it. A writer and a worried phone call were not enough. Raising coverage is not a crime. Asking what something is worth is not a crime. On their own, those facts were suspicious. They were not yet damning. They wouldn't survive 5 minutes against a confident liar in a room full of people who already loved him. I needed more. I needed to know where that watch physically went. Because a watch does not insure itself and then stroll out through a locked door on its own. Somebody carried it out. I was still sitting with that thought all time when my phone buzzed again. This time it was Daniel. He didn't bother with hello. I'm going to make this easy for you, he said. And his voice had that smooth, generous calm he used right before he twisted the knife. Stand up at the party, tell everyone you took it, apologize. We move on, we keep it in the family, nobody else ever has to know. And if I don't? A pause. I could almost hear him smiling. Then I call the police and report it stolen. With your name. I'd hate to do that to my own sister. Another pause. But I will. He thought a police report would bury me. He was so sure of it that he led with the threat like a man holding the only card at the table. I sat there for a long moment after he hung up. The phone still warm in my palm, my heartbeat slow and heavy. The old me would have caved by morning. That me was gone. In her place was someone who read his threat the way she read a fraudulent claim, looking for the part the liar was too confident to hide. He had no idea who reads those reports for a living. Daniel didn't bluff. I'll give him that. The next afternoon, a detective called my parents' house. Daniel had walked into a police station and filed a report. He'd told them his grandfather's Rolex, valued at $48,000, had been stolen from a locked drawer, and he had named a suspect. Me. My mother called to tell me. Her voice was trembling, half horror and half I told you so. He actually did it, Maya. He went down there and filed a report. There's a detective now. This is real. Why won't you just fix this before it ruins the whole family? I stood in my kitchen with the phone against my ear and felt the floor tilt under me for a second. A detective. My name in a police file. The word suspect attached to me in a system that doesn't forget. For one breath, the fear was enormous. I should have been afraid. A part of me was. But a bigger part of me went quiet and sharp, because I knew something my brother didn't. When you file a police report, you sign it. You attest that the statement is true. And a false report isn't a clever family move. It's a crime with your signature on it. My brother had just taken his lie out of the dining room, written it down, and handed it to the state. He thought he was loading a gun to point at me. What he'd actually done was put his own name on an official document, under penalty of law, claiming a theft that the insurance trail already suggested never happened. He'd been so busy aiming at me that he never noticed which way the barrel was facing. I wrote down the detective's name, Reyes. I wrote down the date and the time of the report. Then I did the thing that mattered most, the thing I'd been trained to do before I did anything else. I protected my own hands. The watch was insured on a policy in my book of business. That meant the second a claim got filed, it could land in my company's queue, and someone might notice my last name sitting on the file. So I called my supervisor that evening, before anything blew up, and I recused myself in writing. I told her the truth, plainly. My family was tied to a potential claim on a policy I managed. I had a clear conflict of interest. I was flagging it now, formally, and removing myself from any part of handling, reviewing, or deciding it. I put every word of that in an email, copied the right people, and let the time stamp do its quiet work. Whatever happened next, the record would show I'd stepped back the moment I saw my own name near the file. People think recusing yourself makes you look guilty, like you're running from something. It's the opposite. The cleanest hands in any fraud case belong to the person who raised the flag before anyone made them. I'd spent 12 years watching people get caught because they got greedy and sloppy. I wasn't about to get caught being careful. And then, because I'd flagged it through the proper channel, I learned the thing that changed everything. There was already a claim. Daniel hadn't just reported the watch stolen to the police. He'd filed an insurance claim on it too. A theft claim, for the full $48,000, against the rider he'd added 2 weeks earlier. It listed the lost date as the night of the dinner, carried a claim number, and a digital signature with his name on it. And it was already moving, quietly, toward a payout. 3 lines on a screen. A claim number, a date, and his name. That was all it took to turn a sad family story into a federal-sized problem for the man who filed it. I sat back from my screen, my pulse loud in my ears, and let it settle over me slowly, the way cold water finds you. This was bigger than the dinner table now, bigger than the will. My brother had crossed a line that no apology and no family meeting could ever walk back. Stealing from your parents is ugly. It's a family betrayal. But filing a false insurance claim is not a family matter at all. That's insurance fraud. That's a felony. My brother hadn't just lied to the dinner table. He'd lied to the police, and he'd lied to an insurance company in writing, for money. And here is the part that he never saw coming, because it lived in a blind spot he didn't know existed. To Daniel, the insurance company was a faceless 1-800 number, a call center, a stranger on the other end of a form. He had no idea that the policy he was defrauding ran through his own sister's department. He filed that claim certain that no one who knew him would ever read it. I read it the night he filed it. I didn't touch it. I'd already recused, and I kept my hands off it like it was hot to the touch. But recusing doesn't make you blind, and it doesn't stop the fraud unit from doing its job. The claim went into review through the normal process, the way thousands of suspicious claims do, with the timeline I'd already documented, sitting right there beside it. Then I stepped back and let the machine I'd worked inside for 12 years begin, slowly, to turn. There is a particular kind of patience you learn in this job. You don't chase the liar, you let the paperwork catch up to him. For the first time since that dinner, I actually slept. Not because everything was fixed, because for the first time, I wasn't the one on trial in my own head. The facts were. And the facts were not on my brother's side. But Daniel wasn't finished. Confidence does that to people. It makes them push when a smarter person would stop. And my brother was very, very confident. He started telling the family I'd already sold it, working the room before the room even gathered. He called our aunts. He called our cousins. He told them their poor grandfather's watch was probably already gone, that I'd needed money since the divorce, that I'd pawned a piece of family history to pay my bills. My phone filled up with messages over the next day. Some furious, some cold, some just disappointed, which was somehow the worst. One cousin I'd always been close to, who used to sneak out to the porch with me at holidays, wrote 2 words and nothing else. How could you? It hurt more than I expected. I won't pretend it didn't. I sat alone in my car in the office parking garage, engine off, and read that message 4 times in the dark. The old shame rose up right on schedule and started whispering the lie it had whispered my whole life. That maybe this was somehow my fault. That if I'd just stayed quiet and kept the peace, none of this would be happening. My eyes stung. My thumb hovered over the screen, ready to type an apology I didn't owe. I didn't send it. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and made myself breathe until the shame let go of my throat. Then I picked the phone back up, not to apologize, but to work. Because somewhere in his eagerness to bury me, my brother had overplayed his hand. Because in his eagerness to bury me, Daniel told everyone the same specific thing. He didn't just say I'd sold it. He told them exactly how. Check the pawn shops if you don't believe me, he said, to anyone who'd listen. Go on. Go ask around. You'll see she pawned it. He said it to sound certain. He said it because he assumed no one ever actually checks. But pawn shops aren't a dead end. Pawn shops are one of the most documented transactions in the country. When a shop takes in an item, they record it, they photograph it, they log the serial number. They take a government ID from the person pawning it. And in most places, by law, they report all of it to a database the police can search. My brother had just stood in front of our entire family and dared them to look in the one place on earth that keeps a permanent, photographed, ID-verified record of exactly who walks through the door. He thought he was sounding confident. To me, it sounded like a man pointing at the very evidence that would hang him and laughing while he did it. He told everyone to check the pawn shops. So I did. You can't just walk into a police database. I want to be clear about that, because the how matters. But there was already an active fraud review on a $48,000 claim. And when a claim like that is under review, the investigators handling it are allowed to pull exactly the kind of records that settle it. Pawn transactions report into a database the police and licensed investigators can search. It's routine. It's the first place a real fraud unit looks. So I didn't break a single rule. I just made sure the people now handling the claim knew to look. And then I asked, through the proper channel, to see what came back. What came back stopped my breath. The Rolex had been pawned. Not by me. By Daniel. The record was almost insulting in how complete it was. Here is how a pawn ticket works, in plain terms. The shop writes down what you brought in. They photograph it. They log its serial number. And they take a copy of your government ID, because the law makes them. 3 things on one slip of paper: the item, the date, and the person. Citywide pawn and loan. A vintage men's Rolex, brought in and pawned for cash. The serial number, logged. A clear photo of the watch, and a government-issued ID on file for the person who handed it over. My brother's driver's license. His name. His face staring out of the screen at me. His signature in their book. I stared at his ID photo on my screen for a long time. He hadn't even worn a hat. He hadn't lowered his head or hidden his face. Why would he? In his mind, no one who mattered would ever look at this. He'd walked into that shop the same way he walked into our parents' dining room. Certain. Untouchable. Sure that the rules other people lived by didn't quite apply to him. Then I saw the date, and the whole thing went from damning to airtight. He'd pawned the watch 2 days before the dinner. 2 days before he stood up in front of our family and announced it had been stolen. 2 days before he filed a police report swearing it was taken. The watch wasn't missing when he reported it missing. It had already been sitting on a shelf at Citywide Pawn, under his own name, for 48 hours. I pulled up the pawn record and the insurance claim side by side. Same watch. Same man. One said he sold it on a Thursday. The other said it was stolen from a locked drawer on a Saturday. Both could not be true. Only one had his ID attached to it. But I needed to be certain it was the watch. Family stories get slippery. A defense lawyer would say it was some other Rolex, a coincidence, a mix-up. So I went to the one thing that turns a story into a fact. A number. I drove to my parents' house that evening, while Daniel was out playing the victim somewhere, and I asked my father if I could see Grandpa's things. He let me, because even now, some part of him couldn't fully believe his son. In the back of the closet sat the original box. The blue Rolex box, the one Daniel had waved around empty at the dinner table. It still smelled faintly of my grandfather's cedar drawer. I lifted the lid and there it was. The warranty card. Grandpa kept everything. Every manual, every receipt, every card that ever came with anything he owned. And on that card, written in faded blue ballpoint by a hand that had been gone for years, was the serial number. I held the card in one hand and my phone in the other, the pawn record glowing on the screen. My eyes went back and forth between the card and the screen, one digit at a time. The serial number on Grandpa's warranty card matched the serial number Citywide Pawn had logged. Digit for digit, not close. Identical. The same watch. No coincidence. No mix-up. No other Rolex in the world. The exact one our grandfather wore every single day of his life. The one he'd let me wind as a child, pawned by his own grandson for quick cash, 2 days before he stood up and called me a thief. My hands were steady now, completely steady. The shame was gone, and something cleaner had taken its place. That should have been enough, but I've sat across from too many confident liars to trust enough. A pawn record proves he pawned it. It doesn't prove he took it out of that house. Daniel could still claim he found it, that I gave it to him, that someone handed it to him. I needed to put him at the scene, with the watch, leaving. So I went home and opened the doorbell footage. I'd never looked at it before. 2 years of recordings I'd forgotten I owned, sitting in a cloud account under my name. I filtered to the morning of the day he pawned it and started watching. At 7:14 inches the morning, the front door opened. There was my brother, stepping out early, before anyone else in that house was awake, something small and square in his hand. He paused on the porch. He glanced back at the front door, quick, the way people do when they don't want to be seen. Then he slipped the blue Rolex box into the inside of his jacket and walked to his car. It was the same box he would later hold up empty in front of everyone and use to brand me a thief. The timestamp sat burning in the corner of the frame, white digits on a gray morning. 7:14 a.m. The date matched the pawn ticket exactly. Hours later that same day, that watch was on a shelf at Citywide Pawn. The drawer he swore was locked. The watch he swore was stolen. And here was the recording of him carrying it out the front door himself, hours before he drove it to a pawn shop and signed his name. I watched it 3 times. The first time to be sure, the second time to believe it. The third time I just listened to the quiet of my apartment and let myself feel, for one honest moment, the full weight of what my brother had been willing to trade me for. My name, my place in the family. He'd been willing to spend all of it to cover a debt and a lie. The hurt of that was real, and I let it be real. Then I put it away, because I had work left to do. But I still didn't understand why. A man with money doesn't pawn his grandfather's watch and risk all of this. So I followed the last thread. The money, I couldn't pull his private bank records, and I didn't try. That's a line, and crossing it would have poisoned everything. But the claim file told me plenty on its own. The pawn shop had paid out for the watch, and that payment was traceable. And what I could Daniel was drowning. I'd suspected it for a while without letting myself say it. The new car, the loud dinners, the expensive watch on his own wrist. It was all paper laid carefully over a hole. He had debts coming due that he couldn't cover, the kind that don't wait politely. The pawn cash was a stopgap, a few $1,000s to buy a little time. But the insurance claim, the full $48,000, that was the real plan. Pawn the watch quietly for fast money up front. Wait. Report it stolen. Collect the insurance on top. And pin the whole thing on the family scapegoat, the sister nobody ever believed anyway, so no one would think to look any closer. It was almost smart. It would have worked on any family but the one with a fraud investigator in it. The money didn't vanish. It went to keep my brother afloat, and the watch had to disappear so the story would hold. Now I had all of it. Not a feeling. Not a hunch. Not my word against his, the way it had always been. A sequence, locked together, each piece holding up the next, every link a document with a date on it. For the first time in my life, in this family, I wasn't going to need anyone to believe me. I was going to make it so they couldn't not believe me. He asked what the watch was worth. He insured it for $48,000. He carried it out the front door at 7:14 inches the morning. He pawned it under his own ID and signature. He waited 2 days. He reported it stolen to the police and named me. He filed a claim for the money. And he told the whole family to check the pawn shops, never dreaming anyone would. Every lie he told had left a timestamp. And every timestamp lined up against him. I had the pawn ticket, the serial match, the footage, the claim, the police report, the timeline. I had enough to end this cleanly, in private, with one phone call to the right people. But private wasn't where he'd accused me. He'd done it in front of the whole family, at the dinner table, building toward a party where 30 people and a lawyer would gather to decide whether I deserved to keep my own name. So that's where I'd answer him. In 2 days, everyone would be in one room. The watch would be there in evidence. The lawyer would be there with the will. The detective who took my brother's false report would be there too, because I was going to make sure of it. And so would every single piece of paper Daniel forgot I could read. I walked into my parents' anniversary party as the accused. 40 years of marriage, 30-odd guests, the good china out, a banner strung over the fireplace, the smell of my mother's cooking filling the house the same way it had the night this all began. And me, moving through the room while conversations dropped to whispers behind me. Aunts who used to wrap me in hugs at the door now found somewhere else to look. My cousin from the porch wouldn't even meet my eyes. Daniel had done his work well. By the time I arrived, everyone already knew the story, and the story was that the thief had the nerve to show up to the party. Daniel was holding court by the fireplace, a drink in his hand, loose and smiling. When he saw me, he didn't flinch. He raised his voice instead, so the whole room could hear. "I'm glad you came," he said. "Honestly, it takes guts to show up after what you did." A few people murmured. Someone said, "Maya, please." My mother crossed the room and took my arm. Her fingers were cold. Her voice dropped to that low, pleading register she'd used on me my whole life. "Don't make a scene tonight. Not in front of everyone. For us, just give it back. Say you're sorry, and we can still fix the will. Please, Maya." That was the offer, laid bare in front of everyone. Confess to the lie and they'd let me back in. Hold to the truth, and I'd be written out by midnight. And then the front door opened, and the room changed. Detective Reyes stepped inside. I'd called her department, given them the claim review and the timeline, and asked them to come. She wasn't there for me. She was there because a man had filed a sworn police report, and reports get followed up. The room went quiet in a different way now. My father stood up. Daniel set down his drink. Reyes found me in the crowd, of all people, and her first words landed flat into the silence. "Ma'am," she said, "I'm following up on a reported theft. There are some questions about the watch." A pause. "So let's start simple. Where is it?" Every face in that room turned to me at once. I could feel the weight of all of them, the certainty in their eyes. This was the exact moment Daniel had built, brick by brick. The accused, cornered, a police officer asking the one question I supposedly couldn't answer. I felt 30 people quietly decide my guilt in the space of a single breath. My old self would have crumbled right there. I didn't break. I'd stopped being breakable 2 days ago. I reached into my bag and took out a folder. "I can do better than tell you where it is," I said. "I can show you who took it out of this house." "And when?" Daniel laughed, sharp and quick, playing to the room the way he always did. "Oh, here we go. She's going to fake some documents now? This is unbelievable. Mom, Dad, are you watching this? She's an insurance investigator. She does this for a living. You can't trust a thing she prints out." It was a smart move. He was turning my own job into a weapon against me. A week ago, it might have worked. I opened the folder and laid the first page on the table where everyone could see it. "This is a pawn ticket," I said. "Citywide pawn and loan. It's a vintage men's Rolex, pawned for cash." The shop logged the serial number, took a photo, and copied the ID of the person who pawned it. I slid the second page out. "That's the ID. It's not mine." The photo on the license was Daniel's face. His name, his date of birth. His signature copied right there in the shop's book beside the watch. The murmurs started low and spread across the room like a draft. People leaned toward the table to see. My brother's smile stayed fixed in place, but something behind his eyes flickered, just for a second. That's fake, he said. Anyone can make that. She works in insurance, she knows how to fake paperwork. That proves nothing. He was reaching now. I let him reach. Then let's talk about the serial number. I kept my voice level, almost gentle. I set down the third page, slowly, so everyone could follow it. This is Grandpa's original warranty card. From the box you held up empty at the dinner table. That's his handwriting. The same hand half the people in this room would recognize. And the serial number written on this card matches the serial number the pawn shop logged. Digit for digit, not a similar watch, not a coincidence. The exact same watch that left this house. Someone near the back said it under their breath. Oh my God. A phone came up to record. Then another. The room I'd walked into as the guilty one was starting, slowly, to turn its head. Daniel's voice climbed. So someone used my ID. Identity theft. That's what's happening here. She set me up. She had access to all of it. It was his last real card, and it was a good one. If someone had stolen his identity, none of this touched him. That's a serious claim, I said quietly. Let's check it. I laid down the last page. This is a still from the video doorbell I installed at this front door 2 Christmases ago. The account is under my name, so the footage is mine to pull. This frame is time-stamped 7:14 inches the morning, 2 days before you said the watch was stolen. I put my finger on the image. That's you, walking out the front door, putting that blue box into your jacket. The same morning you pawned it. The room had gone completely silent. The kind of silence that has weight. I looked up from the table and met my brother's eyes for the first time all night. If someone stole your identity, I said, quiet enough that the whole silent room had to lean in to hear it, then explain this to everyone. Who is that man, leaving our parents' house, with Grandpa's box in his hand, hours before that watch was pawned under your name and your signature? Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at our mother. She had both hands pressed over her mouth, her eyes wide and wet above them. He looked at our father, who had risen slowly from his chair and was staring at his son like he was looking at a stranger wearing his face. Daniel turned, searching the room for one ally, one person to jump in and save him the way someone always had. A couple of guests actually stepped back from him, just a half step, the way you move away from something that's about to fall. Nobody met his eyes. Nobody spoke up. For the first time in his entire life, my brother stood in a room full of his own family, and not one single person stepped in front of him. A cousin near the fireplace finally said it out loud, the question Daniel couldn't answer. Daniel, why is that you in the video? He didn't have a sound to make. And Detective Reyes was no longer looking at me at all. She was looking at him. Detective Reyes let the silence sit for a moment. Then she spoke, and her voice carried to every corner of that room. I came here tonight following up on a stolen property report, she said. Mr. Coleman, you signed that report. You swore the watch was taken. She nodded at the pages on the table. What I'm looking at says you pawned it yourself 2 days before you reported it stolen, and then filed an insurance claim for $48,000. She let that number land in the room. Filing a false police report is a crime in this state. Insurance fraud is a felony. She looked around the room, at the family, at the lawyer, at my parents. This stopped being a family disagreement the moment one of you put it in writing and signed it. That was the line. Not shouted. Not dramatic. Just the truth, said plainly by the one person in the room with the authority to act on it. This is no longer a family matter. What happened next happened fast. Reyes reached down and picked up the blue Rolex box from the table. The same empty box Daniel had held over his head at dinner to brand me a thief. She turned it once in her gloved hand, then slid it into a clear evidence bag and pressed it closed. The lid snapped shut with a small, flat click. In that dead silent room, I heard it like a gunshot. The box he'd used as a prop to destroy me had just become the first piece of evidence against him. That tiny click was the sound of the whole story turning all the way over, and everyone in the room heard it too. I'm going to need you to come with me and answer some questions, Reyes told my brother. Tonight, Daniel finally found his voice, and it came out thin and high, nothing like the man who'd held court by the fireplace an hour ago. This is insane. This is my family's party. You can't just "You can come voluntarily," she said, "or we can do this another way. Your choice." He went with her. There wasn't anything else left for him to do, and we both knew it. I watched my brother walk out the front door of our parents' house, past the banner celebrating 40 years of marriage, escorted by the very detective he had personally invited into all our lives. The same front door the camera had caught him sneaking out of at 7:14 inches the morning. He didn't look at me on his way out. He couldn't. The confidence that had filled the room an hour ago had drained out of him completely, and what was left just looked small. The room he left behind didn't erupt. There was no shouting, no scene. It just went quiet and strange, the way a room goes when 40 people realize at the exact same moment that they had been wrong about everything, and that they'd been wrong out loud, to my face, for a week. A few of them couldn't even look at me now, and this time it was shame of a different kind. My mother sank into the nearest chair like her legs had stopped working. My father stood alone in the middle of the floor, holding the pawn ticket in his shaking hands, reading it over and over, as if the words on it might somehow rearrange themselves into a different son. He'd spent 40 years being sure of who his children were. I watched that certainty come apart in real time. The cousin who'd sent me those two cold words, "How could you?" was suddenly at my elbow, saying my name, fumbling toward an apology I was too hollowed out to really hear. And Mr. Okafor, the lawyer, who had driven over that very night to finalize the will, quietly slid his briefcase shut without opening a single document. He caught my eye across the room and gave me one small, sober nod, the kind of nod that says, "I see exactly what just happened here. There would be no signing tonight." Certainly not the version Daniel had spent 2 weeks engineering. I should tell you what came after, because in real life the dramatic night is never actually the end. It's only the beginning of the slow part, the part nobody films. And the slow part is where the real consequences live. The insurance claim was the first thing to fall. With the pawn record, the serial match, and the footage all sitting in the file, the company denied the $48,000 claim outright and referred it to their special investigations unit. The same kind of unit I worked in. Filing that claim hadn't just failed, it had handed them the evidence. The criminal side took longer, the way it's supposed to. There was no instant courtroom verdict, no judge banging a gavel that same night. It took weeks. A formal investigation, statements, the pawn shop's records subpoenaed properly, the footage authenticated, the timeline confirmed by people who didn't share our last name. Real consequences move slowly, because they're built to hold, but they came. Weeks later, Daniel was formally charged. Insurance fraud and filing a false police report, both felonies, both documented in his own handwriting and his own signature, on forms he had volunteered himself. The district attorney's office didn't need me to get up and testify about how my family made me feel. They had a pawn ticket, an ID, a time-stamped video, and a fraudulent claim. They had paper, and paper doesn't sweat, doesn't contradict itself, and doesn't get nervous on the stand. The social fallout didn't wait for the courts. The same family phone tree that had spent a week branding me a thief reversed itself almost overnight. The aunts who'd refused to hug me at the door now called to apologize, their voices careful and small. The cousins who'd repeated his story went quiet with embarrassment. People who'd never once given me the benefit of the doubt suddenly remembered all the times I'd been honest, all the times I'd been the steady one. The legend of the golden child reorganized itself in real time. And for the first time in my entire life, I was not the one cast as the problem in the family's story. And the practical consequences stacked up behind the legal ones, one after another. Daniel lost the $48,000 he'd been counting on to stay afloat, and then some. The debts he'd been hiding behind the new car and the loud dinners came dragging into the light, because secrets like that don't survive an open investigation. He had legal bills now, on top of the ones he couldn't pay before. And the reputation he'd spent his entire life polishing, the trustworthy one, the successful one, the son who could do no wrong, was simply gone. He had spent every bit of it on a single lie about a watch, and the watch had told on him. My mother called me a few days later. She didn't quite know how to apologize for 30 years in one phone call, and she didn't really try. But she said one thing that stayed with me. "We always believed him first," she said. I don't know why. I did know why. I'd known why my whole life. But there was no point in saying it out loud now. Some questions you just let the silence answer for you. As for the will, Okafor rescheduled the signing for a quieter day. I won't pretend the details of someone else's estate are mine to share. I'll only say this. The son who tried to get his sister written out of the family, over a watch he stole himself, did not improve his standing that night. He came to that party planning to walk out of it with my name erased and $48,000 in his pocket. Instead, he walked out of it with a detective at his side and nothing in his pockets at all. The case didn't end with a dramatic trial in a packed courtroom. Most of them never do, no matter what television tells you. A few months later, with the evidence stacked the way it was, Daniel took a plea. His lawyer was never going to put a pawn ticket, a photo ID, a time-stamped video, and a fraudulent claim in front of a jury and hope for the best. So he pleaded. He pleaded to the fraud and to the false police report. He got probation, a criminal record, and an order to pay restitution, including a chunk of the cost of the investigation his own lie had set in motion. There were no handcuffs in a courtroom that day. No dramatic gasp from a gallery. Just a quiet signature on a plea agreement and a permanent line on his record that will follow him into every job application and every background check for the rest of his life. The system moved slowly, and then it simply closed around the truth. It was, the lawyers would say, a proportional outcome. He committed 2 documented felonies, and he answered for exactly those 2. Not more, not less. The watch itself, recovered from the shelf at Citywide Pawn and held as evidence, eventually found its way back to my father. I was there when he opened the blue box and lifted it out. His hands were unsteady. He wound it once, the way Grandpa used to, and didn't say anything for a long while. People ask me if I feel like I won. Honestly, I never quite know how to answer that one. I didn't do any of this to destroy my brother. I want to be honest about that. I did it because I was about to be erased, written out of my own family in a signed legal document, for something I never did. When someone decides to spend your name to cover their debts, you don't owe them your silence. I didn't have a single weapon in that fight except the truth and the patience to document it. So that's exactly what I used. My parents and I are something now, not close, not fully healed, but honest maybe for the first time in 30 years. My mother still doesn't quite understand how I did it. She thinks I must have some special access, some insider trick. I don't. And I've stopped trying to explain it. I simply kept the receipts that everybody else in this family threw away. The insurance account they forgot I'd built for them. The camera I'd mounted by the door as a Christmas gift. The text message he never imagined I'd scroll back and read. If there's one thing I'd want you to take from all of this, it's small and unglamorous. Stay calm. Keep your records. The people who are sure they can lie about you are usually counting on you being too hurt to check. Don't give them that. I never raised my voice that whole night. I never had to. I just laid the paper on the table and let the date speak. My brother thought my quiet meant I was weak. He thought the family that always doubted me would doubt me one more time. He spent $48,000 and his own good name betting that no one would ever look closely at the watch. He came for my name. He left with a case number.